The clipboard slammed against the metal table with a metallic bang that silenced the entire operations tent. General Briggs didn't even look at the soldier, he just humiliated. His voice sliced through the thick tension like a combat knife. "You're a kid with a screen. You don't tell me how wars start." Private James J. Walker stood frozen, not from fear, but from something far more corrosive: recognition. He recognized the type. Men like Briggs had stripes on their shoulders and certainty in their veins. They didn't ask, they declared. And right now, Briggs had declared him a nuisance, an obstacle, a nobody. But what the general didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the patterns Jay saw on the screen were no ordinary interference. They were the exact same frequency distortions he had decoded once before, back when lives were on the line, and nobody believed him then either. "Sir, those heat signatures aren't natural. I've cross-referenced the satellite logs. They're mobile. They're coordinated," Jay tried to explain. Briggs snapped without even facing him. "If you say one more word, Private, I'll have you transferred to base maintenance in Bahrain." Everyone in the tent looked away. No one wanted to be caught sympathizing with the rookie who just got dressed down in front of command. The only sound was the soft hum of machines, the very machines Jay knew were screaming something no one else had the ears to hear. But even as the insult echoed through the tent, Jay's eyes remained locked on the screen. The ghost patterns were shifting again, slowly, subtly, but unmistakably alive. He whispered under his breath, "They're moving, right under the storm." And that was when the narrator's tone drops half a note, as if leaning in closer with the audience. What the general didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jay wasn't some fresh-faced rookie out of boot camp. He had spent 5 years buried in code, working in the gray zone of digital warfare before ever touching a rifle. He had seen viruses hidden in children's cartoons, cyberattacks disguised as weather reports, and GPS signals hijacked through nothing but a Bluetooth tower. Jay had walked through fire before. But this was an inferno, and the men in charge were busy playing chess while the board was on fire. "The sandstorm isn't natural either," Jay whispered again. "They're using it to hide the columns." But no one heard him. No one cared. Not yet. And as the tension builds, the narration sharpens. Right there, inside that sterile command post lit with humming fluorescent lights and filled with men in pressed uniforms, the fate of a border region was being decided. Not by missiles or drones, but by one soldier staring into a blinking grid of red pixels and knowing something no one else did. Jay didn't have rank. He didn't have medals. What he had was a truth no one was ready to hear. "They're already inside the zone," he muttered, eyes fixed. "They're using blind spots between recon cycles. 2 hours, and they'll breach the western perimeter." And now, as if pausing in real time, the narrator delivers the line that sets the stage for everything that follows. But in less than 20 minutes, that nobody would become the only reason hundreds of soldiers lived to see another sunrise. Because sometimes, a war isn't won by strength. It's won by the one person brave enough to be called crazy, until the truth explodes in everyone's face. Before we go further into this classified night, pause for just a moment, because I need to ask you something. Have you ever been ignored when you knew you were right? Have you ever seen the danger before everyone else, only to be told to sit down, stay quiet, and let the real men talk? If yes, then what happened next will hit harder than you expect. Slight pause, and if stories like this speak to you, about quiet heroes, impossible choices, and the moments where one voice changes everything, subscribe to this channel. Because every week, we tell the stories that almost got buried in silence. Stories about real courage, wrapped in fiction but echoing the truth. Beat of silence, the narrator leans back into the scene. Back in the tent, Jay knew 2 things. 1, if he pushed harder, he might be court-martialed. 2, if he stayed quiet, people would die. But what no one knew, not the commander, not the strategist, not even the tech team scanning comms, was that Jay had already made his choice. Because buried deep in the logs was something only he could recognize. Not a weapon, not a warning, but a pattern, a code signature, one he had seen once before, long before he ever wore the uniform. It wasn't a false alarm. It wasn't just weather. It was a cover operation, and the countdown had already begun. Forward Base Orlan sat like a forgotten scar in the western desert. Rows of sand-colored tents flapped in the wind. Watchtowers loomed over the cracked ground. Everything smelled of diesel, iron, and sweat. The sun had long disappeared behind a wall of dust, one stirred not by nature, but by strategy. And inside the operations tent, lit by flickering screens and the low whine of generators, sat General Maxwell Briggs. He wore his uniform like armor, impeccably pressed, metals polished to reflection. His boots never touched the dirt, figuratively or literally. A man who had seen enough war to stop asking questions and too much pride to hear answers from below his rank. He didn't shout often. He didn't need to. One glare from Briggs could silence a colonel. And so, when he dismissed Jay with that infamous sentence, "You're a kid with a screen," the room obeyed his silence like gospel. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a warning. Speak again and you disappear. But Jay wasn't built to disappear. Not anymore. Because before he was Private Jay Walker, he was null unit, a ghost on the internet, a prodigy in stolen coffee shops and abandoned server farms. He had cracked ransomware holding hospitals hostage, exposed hidden tracking software in kids' apps. And once, only once, he intercepted an Iranian cyber drill meant to map vulnerabilities in U.S. satellite systems. That experience got him noticed by the wrong people, and when the feds knocked on his door, they gave him a choice: disappear into a courtroom or disappear into uniform. Jay chose uniform. He never told anyone, not even the base techs, who still thought he was just that kid from Idaho. So when he recognized the satellite distortions, the same code layering trick used during that Iranian drill years ago, his body went cold. It wasn't interference. It was a rehearsed masking protocol. And it was happening live. But across the tent, General Briggs was focused on optics, not anomalies. He paced with arms behind his back, muttering into a secure headset about political ramifications, optics in D.C., and the need to de-escalate this childish paranoia from Tel Aviv. To him, war was won through strategy and status. And Jay was a speck of dust, an interruption. Briggs didn't believe in ghosts, especially not ghosts hiding in sandstorms and code. Jay watched the data tick. Every second, a new flash, a new anomaly. They were triangulating, moving, advancing, not with tanks, but with precision cloaking. The Iranians had used the same satellite relays, disguised as weather drones, to relay encrypted troop movements. Each pulse in the data was a column of men crawling forward under camouflage and silence. Jay's heart pounded, not with fear, but calculation. He knew he had 12 minutes before the satellite angle shifted. And no one believed him. He remembered his first failure. 3 years ago, a school in Jakarta, a local network had been compromised with a Trojan payload that triggered a digital blackout just hours before an extremist bombing. Jay had flagged the pattern, sent anonymous warnings. No one listened, and 47 students died. He never forgot their names. He kept the list in a notebook, folded in his front pocket. He joined the military not for war, but for access, to be in the room before the next catastrophe. And now he was. But the room was filled with deaf ears, and time was bleeding out. And somewhere, just beyond the radar, the desert was breathing. Not with wind, but with marching men. Waiting for the blind spot. Waiting for silence. And all that stood between them and disaster was a soldier no one wanted to hear. The storm howled louder now, rattling the canvas walls of the operations tent like angry fists. A reddish haze covered the satellite feeds, distorting visibility. The desert was blind. Radios crackled. Visibility dropped to under 30 meters. Sandstorms like this don't just happen here, Jay muttered. But no one responded. Not anymore. After his confrontation with General Briggs, Jay had been physically pushed to the far end of the tent, reassigned to data redundancy oversight. A nice way of saying, sit in the corner and shut up. The rest of the officers moved on without him. And yet, Jay didn't stop. He couldn't. He reopened the encrypted relay logs, line by line, pulse by pulse. And there it was again, same signal sequence as before. Perfect spacing, precision sync. It wasn't weather. It was war. Cut to a deeper voice now. A thought, not spoken, Jay's inner voice. This is Jakarta all over again. Different region, same blindness, same refusal to listen. Jay's fingers moved faster. He wasn't just watching the pulses now, he was building a ghost map. Each ping from the desert translated into a movement, a route, a vector of approach. And he was right. The Iranian troops were already within 10 kilometers of the western perimeter. Across the tent, General Briggs barked orders over a secure line. He was furious, not at the threat, but at the embassy in Jerusalem for leaking preliminary warnings. It's a bluff. Iran wouldn't risk this. It's theatrics. They're always testing us. Don't take the bait, he spat. Colonel Haynes, the second in command, offered a nervous glance toward the storm-shrouded monitors. Sir, the Israeli recon drones did report unusual movement. Maybe. Briggs cut him off with a hand. We act on facts, not ghost stories from scared kids or paranoid allies. The word kids struck the air like a slap. Jay heard it, felt it, but didn't flinch. Because ghost stories were real, he had lived them. Jay was alone now. No team, no support, just a laptop, 3 thermal feeds, and a gut instinct refined in years of digital warfare. He breathed slow, focused. He opened a secret utility, a tool he had coded himself years ago, never used in uniform. It stitched together low-frequency heat data with known terrain elevations, revealing motion even in the absence of light. And then there it was. Movement. Human-sized. Moving in formation. 20 units. Maybe more. Jay leaned forward. They're forming a flanking crescent, west to south. Full encirclement strategy. Classic asymmetrical pincer move. He checked the time. 4:16 a.m. Less than 20 minutes until they reached the munitions depot. If they breached it, the entire base would light up like a fireworks factory, and no one inside would make it out. Beat. Jay swallows hard, then opens the encrypted base-wide comms. He wasn't authorized. Didn't matter. Base oil on command. This is Private Walker. I'm initiating an override ping. We have enemy contact within 10 kilometers. Repeat, we have movement breaching the perimeter. Silence. Then, Private Walker, who authorized this transmission? It was Briggs. Voice like thunder. Jay didn't blink. Sir, I've cross-verified 3 separate feeds. This is not a simulation. We have active breach under sandstorm cover. Walker, stand down. You are not cleared to access Tier 4 communications. You're committing a federal offense. Then court-martial me later, sir. But listen now. Check sectors 4 Delta and 3 Bravo. You'll see them. Silence again. This time longer. Then a second voice. Colonel Haynes. Sir, he's right. We just got a flicker on 4 Delta. Something's moving. Briggs' voice cracked. That's not possible. Jay took a breath. Not of relief, but of commitment. Because this wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about stopping what everyone else refused to see. And he knew what would happen next. Either he was right, or he would be buried a traitor. But the desert was no longer silent. And the ghosts Jay had been tracking, they were now in range. Marching. Ready. Armed. And he was the only line left between them and the sleeping base just beyond the curtain of dust. The desert outside had become a wall of noise. Howling, thick, suffocating. The storm erased all visuals, all assumptions, and all excuses. And inside the tent, every screen began to flicker with movement. Small, faint, but undeniable. Colonel Haynes tapped a monitor, his finger trembling slightly. Sir, multiple hits on thermal. Not weather. Not animals. Human signatures. Exactly where Walker said. General Briggs stood frozen. No barked orders now. No clipped certainty. Just silence, heavy and absolute. Jay didn't gloat, didn't blink. He simply pointed at his laptop screen and said calmly, They're using dual-band interference to mask IR signatures between sweeps. That's why your systems didn't catch it. I used low-band extrapolation. They're leapfrogging between static interference zones. Another officer whispered. That's why we saw nothing. They were never staying still long enough. Jay looked around the room. The disbelief was turning into fear. He stepped forward. They're coordinated, but not fully in sync. That gives us a window. Briggs finally found his voice. What kind of window? 4 minutes. Maybe less. Haynes turned to Briggs, urgency building. Sir, we need to mobilize drones now. No, Jay interrupted. Everyone stared. If we send drones now, they'll scatter and use civilian cover to retreat. We won't stop them. We'll just delay it. Then what do you suggest? Briggs growled. Jay pointed to a map overlay. There's a natural bottleneck between the outer fuel reserves and the supply bunkers. If we drop emergency floodlights now, before they know we see them, we can disorient and contain. Then we lock the perimeter with thermal-guided patrols from sectors 2 and 5. Briggs narrowed his eyes. You're suggesting we blind them and surround them with noise? Jay nodded. It's what they're doing to us. We turn the field back on them. Haynes turned to the comms officer. Do it. Deploy counterlighting and send ground patrols. Quietly. Sirens didn't wail. Orders didn't boom. The response began in whispers. Fast hands, running boots, and silence. Because now, finally, they believed him. The sandstorm glowed suddenly, faintly. Bright lights burst from the edges of the desert like false dawn. The Iranian flank stumbled, exposed and confused by the instant illumination. Thermal patrols swept in, moving silently along the bottleneck Jay predicted. And it worked. Like clockwork. The enemy froze, caught off guard, surrounded off balance. Command confirmed 0 U.S. casualties, 1 Iranian advance disabled, 2 platoons captured, and a full-scale escalation avoided. Back inside the tent, the room was silent again, but it wasn't disbelief this time. It was awe. Jay stood at his terminal unmoving, not gloating, not smiling. He didn't need recognition. He needed to breathe, and when Briggs finally approached, there was no rage in his eyes. No pride. Only something rarely seen in a general. Respect. Private Walker, he said, his voice low. You saved us all. You saved me. Jay nodded, no emotion. It's what I signed up for, sir. Where did you learn to see that kind of pattern? Jay paused, considering the weight of the truth. Then, simply, I used to live in the noise. Beat. Now. I listen. Briggs stared a moment longer, then offered his hand. Jay shook it, and the room, every officer, every rank, stood a little straighter. Not because he had stripes, but because he earned them. The sun rose over forward base Orlan, not in a blaze of triumph, but in quiet survival. The sandstorm had passed. The threat had been neutralized. And the young soldier no one listened to had become the reason everyone was still alive. Jay walked alone across the tarmac, the morning heat baking the dust beneath his boots. Soldiers nodded as he passed, not out of routine, not out of rank, but out of recognition. He wasn't a rookie anymore. He wasn't a kid with a screen. He was the one who saw what no one else would even look at. Inside the command tent, a new mood had settled. Briggs had ordered a full debriefing. Not to justify his mistake, but to document Jay's process. He wanted it preserved. Jay sat at the head of a briefing table for the first time. Not because of power, but because truth earned its place. Haynes asked him, How did you know, exactly? What made you so sure? Jay glanced down at his notebook, creased, smudged, and worn. Inside were the names of 47 students from Jakarta, the ones who paid for someone else's doubt. I didn't know, Jay answered, but I recognized the silence. And I remembered what happened the last time I ignored it. No one responded. They didn't need to. Later that day, a recommendation went up the chain. Not just for commendation, but for transfer. Jay Walker was reassigned to Strategic Signal Intelligence, not as a listener, but as a designer. The youngest ever invited to build future threat detection protocols. He would never be silenced again. And yet, despite the medal he was offered, despite the invitation to speak at high-level briefings, Jay said the same thing to everyone who asked how he stayed calm in that tent. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just refused to let another disaster happen on my watch. Narrator slows again, transitioning to moral tone. You see, sometimes, the loudest voice in the room isn't the one that's right. And the smartest one in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Jay Walker was mocked, dismissed, isolated. But the moment his truth aligned with action, everything changed. He didn't need stripes on his shoulders to earn respect. He didn't need permission to speak. He just needed to trust what he saw. Because there are moments in this world where certainty kills, and doubt saves lives. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, if you've ever seen the danger before anyone else, felt the storm brewing long before the sky turned black, Then remember this. You are not alone. There is a jaywalker in all of us. And when the world tells you your voice is too small, your insight too strange, your instincts too inconvenient, that's exactly when you're needed the most. Because silence may keep you safe, but the truth saves everyone.